Alright, hi everyone. So today I'm going to be doing a little bit of sketching. I have this blue ink that my son actually got, and I really love this tone and color. So I'm going to be using this today. And this basic kind of pen tool, like dip ink pen tool that I have, is probably just the cheapest option that I found at the art store. So I'm using that as well. I've been trying to use a little more of this type of tool because it has an interesting kind of feel to it. It's a little more unpredictable, and trying to control that has been kind of fascinating. I really love using usually like micron pens or other type of ink pens in general, but I really like the way this one feels, so I'm kind of getting used to this more. And I had the idea of maybe creating like a boxed in space for just pure abstraction to kind of exist in this particular sketch. So I wanted to try to utilize this kind of restrictive outline and then just go from there and see kind of whatever pops up, whatever happens. I'll be talking about like a few different things today. I'll be talking about this sketch, but also some other things that have been going on recently with the artwork, and kind of some ideas that I've been thinking about and things that I'd like to talk about in general. I've been trying to draw a lot more, which has been great. I think ironically trying to keep up with social media has made me more prolific with my sketching, which is great because I haven't really done a lot of sketching over the last like 10 years. It's always been in relation to planning for a piece or kind of like a warm-up type of exercise that wouldn't get shown often or for any other reason besides just in preparation for a painting that's going to go into a gallery. So doing more abstract work like this has been really great lately because it's definitely been a relaxing kind of meditative exercise for me. Something that the fine artwork or the stuff that ends up in galleries, it can be like that sometimes, but oftentimes I am thinking about its purpose and kind of where it's supposed to go and what it's supposed to be for a viewer. Not in a stressful way, but just there's a lot of like thought that goes into that. The sketching and abstract kind of sketchbook type work has definitely been the opposite of that. So it's been a really nice balance actually, which I don't know if I would have done that naturally. It's kind of interesting how that happened, because without like trying to create something to be presented, whether on social media or my website or whatever, or here on YouTube, like I don't know if I would be doing as much sketching again. So I'm kind of thankful for this, like coming around full circle. Like that's how I started my art career and what I did in the beginning. And I didn't really know how I would get back into drawing all the time like I did when I was young, without, when you have like not a worry in the world, without like social media. So it's been nice for that reason. And it's also kind of forced me to think about my abstraction a little bit more and how to vary it and how to kind of come up with like these different lines and different things that can utilize a space and with single color, possibly without a subject or a main subject. That usually being, that typically is the figure or a portrait or something like that. So delving strictly into, abstract work with pen and ink has been really great because I feel like I'm learning a lot about my own abstraction, my own way of kind of developing line work. It's obviously a continuous learning process, but lately I've been getting back into some of the illustrators and people that I really admire, and people that still hold like an aesthetically pleasing vision even to this day for me. I remember years ago seeing like some scarves by Hermes, that luxury brand, and they have certain illustrators that I've always just loved their work, and especially when they're utilized for articles of clothing like they did with Hermes and some of the lines they've done with their scarves. So I've been looking at a lot of like Ugo Gattoni, and I can't remember the other name of that other person that they've used too, but he's done some really cool work. Really great illustrator. I'll have to come up with like a list of all my favorites, the ones that really have kind of influenced the way I see line and shape and stuff. But the variety of lines that take place in some of my work are very much inspired by some of those types of illustrators. And then that usually crosses over into the fine art work and the abstraction that kind of takes place around my own figures and that kind of line work, which that's really where a lot of the line work came from. I mean, when I was young, I was planning on being an illustrator, and I loved drawing in that type of way because that's how I kind of taught myself to draw and learn, was from like illustration. And back in the day when I was really young, I wanted to be like a comic book artist and like a cartoonist. And then I kind of became disinterested with that world. So then I moved into just illustration and like design, which I love those combinations. And then I kind of moved away from that and ended up in fine art just because when the more contemporary art that I was introduced to, the more I really loved that world in particular. So but that crossover there in the contemporary art world, there can be that crossover. So that's why that world appealed to me and why that was so interesting to me, because you could be, when I was young and I was seeing some of these like street artists that were creating work in the contemporary world, I felt like I could connect with their visions more than I could like the traditional, landscape painter type of art world, because I didn't understand that world as much. Like I've come to appreciate it nowadays and kind of see its value and like what it is. But back in the day, I just couldn't relate to that. I didn't grow up with that. I didn't really like see a lot of that. And I didn't learn how to paint or draw in those ways in like a traditional setting. So I learned from the more contemporary kind of modern way of drawing and illustrating and combining line work with, depth and form, and to depict things that are abstract or things that are more simplistic. That's where a lot of my style comes from too. So even with like a drawing like this, like I'm thinking about just basic shape and form and contrast in the way that an illustrator probably would. I'm not necessarily thinking in like a traditional sense in any form. When it comes to the figure, that's where a lot of my respect and love for the tradition comes from. But when I'm just like messing around with pen and ink, this is usually kind of how things can turn out. And the most interesting part to me is just trying to balance shape and form with a single line, with single color. And that I can just kind of do for hours. I mean, certain sketches are, 20 minutes long and others can take hours. So I'm able to just kind of let my mind wander and be free a little bit and just think about space and composition. And that's definitely always really interesting to me. And I think I'm learning more about the tools that I do enjoy and that I do like using. I'm not necessarily someone who's like constantly experimenting with different tools and ways of, different things to use and utilize. So keeping things simple for this drawing was definitely like one of my goals. And I'm kind of still discovering like how I even like to sketch and draw, or at least that's what it feels like. I mean, maybe that never goes away. It's difficult to say, but it's endlessly fascinating the way things can turn and take turns, and every piece, even something as simple as a sketchbook drawing. So that's what makes it fun and makes it interesting. You see these like, the more I draw, the more I see like repeated patterns and things that I do love aesthetically, which are going to be a lot of floral shapes mixed with kind of these geometric forms, which, I mean, the more I talk, the more I probably sound like a broken record when I'm like talking about these subjects, because that is constantly the bounce in all of my work. But sometimes those forms can take on a new life and a new shape. So I try to think about that too and be open to those different changes and the way that those things, the directions that those things can go in. Yeah, I mean, those are some of the recent things I've been thinking about while I'm drawing. And I've also thought about kind of the combination of illustration and painting, moving. I do contemplate kind of moving away from it sometimes into just more kind of painterly type work. But I have such a love for line work and utilizing line work. It's hard not to just combine that with my painting. And again, like I was saying earlier, like it doesn't happen naturally for me in the way that maybe more traditional artists, the way that happens for them, especially if they were raised to kind of think about paint and paint strokes in a certain way or utilizing line work in a different way. I think a lot of like traditional artists that are raised with like traditional charcoal techniques or depicting form in a specific way, there's not a lot of, line is like a differentiating, it's like a separation between forms. There aren't really necessarily even lines that occur naturally in nature. There's only like, high contrast to low contrast areas. There's only difference between values and depth that create those values. So when you're thinking about things that way, lines are kind of like this made up extra thing that an artist uses as like a stylistic tool or a differentiation tool in your work aesthetically. I mean, line is kind of interesting. The line and using line in your work is kind of interesting for that reason, because it's not necessarily something that, you're depicting in life. You're using it to depict something else. You're using it to differentiate between spaces, between values, between shapes, to show depth. The more lines, cross-hatching, all these things are being used in place of a gradation for a value. So it's kind of interesting to think about that when you're creating, because obviously it's a tool, it's a technique, it's a skill that you use visually, aesthetically, but it's not necessarily something that is there otherwise. You're using it in place of what is there technically. So in that sense, it kind of feels like you can do anything with it, which is why I love line work so much. And I probably won't ever get rid of the abstraction. I mean, if I'm being honest with myself, like I think the balance between like traditional realism and abstraction is still fascinating to me. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I'm just like creating, in my paintings anyway, I'm just like replicating the same idea over and over because I'm so interested in it, and which is a nice place to be. I mean, I'm not constantly trying to come up with like a new idea. Things might take a drastic turn later at some point, but I don't necessarily see that happening soon. We'll see, but I'm just interested in more ways to utilize the line and kind of create abstractions with it. I'm definitely not bored of it or sick of it. So I didn't understand when I was young, like how artists repeat themselves for so long and they just have something that they do for so many years. But now I kind of understand that because I'm starting to kind of find that place where I can just exist with my vision, which happens to be abstraction and realism mixed together with the use of line work. And that's a nice place to be. It feels comfortable in the right way, like not content, but it feels like it's something that it's like an area I can kind of exist as an artist and just kind of do that forever and feel comfortable with that. Now, obviously, there's so many other things that I'm constantly thinking about and feeling anxious about in regards to the work, whether it's achieving, the end goal that I'm looking for, or whatever. There's so many other worries. I'm not saying I sit around and I don't worry about a thing, but as far as like the actual work and creation of the work, it's a nice place to be. Now, right now, the art market and like the way things are going in general for artists, I think is super random. It's definitely a weird time to like try to be an artist. I mean, the more I think about it anyway, like if I don't think about it, obviously I don't worry about it. But if I think about like what galleries are going through or what I'm hearing from other artists or like what sales are like for certain people compared to others, like what the art fairs are like all these, there's so many factors taking place. I mean, it's 2025, so this is very much like, I'm talking about like of the time right now. I'm not saying like in general, but this year in the United States is a little bit random for the art world, and it has been for the last couple of years. Honestly, like the last 2 to 3 years have been pretty random ever since COVID. But I mean, this is kind of off topic, but it's just stuff I've been thinking about. I don't. It is strange to kind of be an artist right now because of so many things. But when the market isn't, I mean, art is such a it can be a kind of utilitarian thing. It can be also a completely, you know, unimportant to society type of thing as well. So I think I see artists kind of feeling that all over, and the more artists I've talked to, the more they're kind of feeling that too. Like you're either falling into one or the other category. Like you're either an artist whose work is just, your career is just kind of being put on hold for a while. Like you're just not going to be existing in the same way for a while as you probably were used to, which that's kind of been a long time coming. Unfortunately, I could kind of see that happening a few years ago, even before COVID, honestly. Like it was starting to take some random directions in the market. I mean, it fluctuates, it goes through cycles. It's all a natural part of probably how the world works. I mean, nothing lasts forever and stuff, but um, especially lately, the more that things are kind of felt in the economy, our art becomes an extra. And unfortunately, like in the US, that is just how it is. I think people enjoy and appreciate art just as much, but how it gets supported or how it gets utilized in society, or how artists get paid for things, or how all of those things kind of change when the rest of the economy and the world is changing, obviously. I mean, so artists have like they kind of exist in this weird area in the economy where you, if it's not incredibly immediately useful to a specific thing or person or company or whatever, you're existing in this like weird purgatory type of artist career space where you're just going to be waiting until you can figure out exactly how it should and can be utilized, like your own work anyway, like what you do as an artist and stuff. Now, that being said, I mean, there's always space and room for the arts, and there are always artists that are making a living, creating work, doing interesting things with their work. There's always going to be that. I mean, there's always somebody out there doing the thing that you probably want to do, and making a living at it. So I try to remember some of that stuff too, even when like things slow down and the year goes, it's kind of odd and the markets are kind of weird, and I think about that stuff a lot, because I'm an artist and because I have a lot of friends that are artists as well, and some of them are doing great still, and they have been for the last like 4 or 5 years, and you know others are kind of changing the way they're dealing with things and doing their careers and making things happen and stuff because they're being forced to kind of. And I mean, that's all right. I think it's hard, but it's inevitable. I mean, it is what it is. So you just do the best with what you can, with what you have, and the rest you just have to be patient, pray for help, I guess, and being patient and kind of seeing things clearly. But anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent on the economy and stuff. I've just been thinking about that a lot lately. I think it's made me think about my own work a lot. It's made me think about like what I want to do as an artist. Everything that's been happening and everything that's happening in the world, especially. And I still always come back to the idea that, the arts are incredibly important. Even something as simple as just like illustration and and just, interesting visuals being presented online, social media. Like, I think that stuff does add to the world, and it does add a lot more than people think. I mean, there's the practical side of the art world, which is stuff that's used for, product campaigns, or stuff that's done for companies, or editorial illustrations, or, there's all those aspects, artists that pair with, different products. And it is, and then that branches into like design and stuff, which is even more practical, but maybe less art, maybe less, not thought about as the arts necessarily. And then there's the fine art world, stuff that's consumed purely for its own kind of visual value. And that's, I am never uninterested in this world and the things that do that are involved with it. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. So that's, I mean, it's just inevitable. And it's important as an artist to just kind of keep going and kind of put all that stuff aside, because you definitely don't want to be having your creative output hinge on like what's going on around the world, around you in the world, and like what's happening and what you think you should be doing. And if it's your job and if that's what you do full time, then you do have to make some pretty specific decisions. And I commend you for that. I mean, just doing it like that in general. If you're just an artist in general and you're kind of wondering about your place and like what the purpose is of, I'm just taking my headphones off, what the purpose is, of your work, or like what you're supposed to be doing, like that's a hard one. You want to remember like the big points, like the overarching ideas that an artist should be kind of aware of and thinking about, which is that if you have a specific vision, if you have certain things you want to say with your work, if you have a particular, aesthetic that you want to put into the world, like that's kind of just the main focus, and it should be the main focus. How that vision gets carried out, how often you do it, what your development is as an artist, and when those developments take place, and the way you adapt to the world and the economy, like that stuff is all extra, and it is important too. But I always come back to the conclusion that it's just important to keep creating and to do it for the love of creating that work, and then the rest is up to you for sure. I mean, I've met some artists that are great artists and they just do it because they love it. They're not necessarily super concerned with their own place in the art world or how the art world functions and their place in it at all. Or in the kind of illustration, getting paid for what you do type world either. And then I've met artists who have taken kind of put their own vision on the, to the side, and have just kind of delved into making a living at, filling a specific niche or a thing that exists. And there's nothing wrong with that either necessarily. They're making a living doing what they're doing. They enjoy their life and their lifestyle as an artist on that particular path. And that's awesome too. So and some of those people make a lot of money doing like what they're doing. And I think there's room for all of that at the same time. So I try not to, it doesn't have to just exist in this like super black. It's very nuanced for sure. I mean, being an artist and in the world is a very nuanced thing. So there's so much room for all these different types of things. I think everybody in the art world, because art in and of itself is unfortunately secondary in a lot of ways in the world, like because it obviously it comes after all the necessities. I mean, that's just how it has to be. Like I don't think we should tell ourselves that it's more important than putting food on the table or providing for our families or paying rent or whatever. Like you gotta have a roof over your head. You gotta do what you have to do, and those are the things that are going to come first. If that's if those things are not being met on a regular basis, like you won't. Art can function almost as like an escape or something, but it's not going to be the priority, and nor should it necessarily be. Like you do kind of have to figure the other stuff out, like regardless. Um, but that being said, you know, we don't none of us like want to be in a world without it, and whenever that kind of is your world, it doesn't take very long to realize like, oh, I just want to go back to the world that involves some kind of art, music, movies, whatever. I mean, visual arts. Like that's a lot of people, live for those things, and I happen to be a huge supporter of, prioritizing the visual arts in my life. But even if it's on a casual basis, if I go too long without kind of consuming some kind of visual beauty, I do notice it, and I do notice that the visual or the aesthetic that I am taking in of like the downtown area in my city, or which isn't very beautiful, or or other types of things, like I'm not there is a piece missing or something that doesn't feel like it's being fulfilled. And I think a lot of artists probably could maybe relate, could relate to that. So that's the importance of it right there. I mean, if I'm not, like in the past, I wasn't an artist full time. Like before I entered the art world, I wasn't doing art full time, and I would still find myself like that's still just kind of what I thought about, what my main concern was, the things I was attracted to online when I was going on to like blogs and websites and stuff like that. I was just looking at design and illustration and like different artists I liked, and consuming their content on like YouTube or Instagram or whatever, like even back in the day before I was a full-time artist and stuff like recently I have been getting more into um, the types of art that I originally was drawn to, which, like I mentioned, like more illustration, more kind of more interesting, kind of out there types of artists and stuff. But um, yeah, oh, I lost my train of thought. I did have a point. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. But anyway, this drawing is developing. I decided to kind of break the restriction I was putting on myself for like boxing this piece in, and it's just kind of flowing all over the paper now. And this ink is really specific to work with because it is pretty, well, I guess it's the pen. The pen is specific to work with. Obviously, I'm kind of getting it on my hands at this point, and it's smearing in certain places because it's not drying as quickly. I'm using it kind of thick. But overall, I do kind of like where it's going. It's became way more involved than I thought, actually, I was going to have this one, or how involved I thought it was going to be. But I love these like weird kind of leafy like formations mixed with those kind of white orbs. I like that. Definitely gives the orb some like presence and depth when everything else around it is so kind of densely involves a lot of like dense cross hatching and heavy kind of detailed line work around it. And I'm gonna start kind of adding in, I think I'm gonna add in some geometric shapes and forms, almost like tablet like shapes and elements. I always like kind of mixing those in too. I guess I'm starting to have a little bit of like a go-to set of like textures and shapes, which there's nothing wrong with. I mean, I like creating this type of thing. So I do want to kind of widen that variety and like my own scope of like illustration, kind of pattern techniques. So I'm been paying attention to that more recently too. I've been seeing some really incredible like illustrators online on Pinterest. Unfortunately, I don't have names of them. Maybe I'll go over a list at some point and do like a video about it or something of people ones I think people should see. But some of these people, are big names. I'm not great with names, but so I'm forgetting a lot of them. But a lot of them have like attention already online and stuff. But others like Ugo Gattini or Gattoni, I mean, You know, like I hadn't really heard his name before. I just seen his work, which, I mean, when you search up his work, it's obviously really impressive. It's really cool, really high, really detailed work. I always love that with like really a lot of color involved. It makes sense that he did Hermes stuff. Um, so like I've definitely been looking at more of that stuff lately and kind of thinking about, or those types of artists, and kind of thinking about like how many structures and like elements I can bring into my work, so it's not just repetitive kind of floral like formations, because I do love those too. I want to have like a larger like toolbox or set of things to use um, when I'm creating my work. So I kind of try to look for that. At least when I'm like seeing when I'm taking in like work online or like stuff on Instagram or whatever, like I'm paying attention to like the different techniques and kind of variety of textures and shapes that these artists are using. And see if anything would fit into kind of like my own repertoire of like tools that I use to create shape and texture. And so far, I'm happy with like what I've been able to not replicate, but like bring into my own set of tools. I do really love like architectural. I'm trying to fit. I mean, recently I've been trying to figure out like how to bring in more architecture based kind of line work and shapes and forms, because they seem to off bounce the floral stuff in a really interesting way to me. But when you're doing that, I mean, I've been kind of exploring it a little bit, because when you're dealing with like perspective, it's easy to kind of make things look weird, and which is not like, I'm not going for like the surrealist kind of confusing aesthetic look. Like I want these shapes to kind of blend in a space that is already fairly two dimensional in its viewpoint. Like there isn't a crazy amount of depth here. It's almost more like design, decorative illustration type thing. Like you don't get the feeling that like you're viewing a lot of different planes in some of these drawings I'm doing. So when you bring in something with a lot of perspective, such as, you know, a 3D kind of cube-like object or something, or space, it does change it a little bit. It can become like a focal point when maybe it shouldn't be, unless I want it to be. But I haven't found that bounce yet. So I'm kind of like slowly gauging where I can do those types of shapes and like add those types of things in. And then I immediately switch back to floral shapes, because they're my comfort zone probably. And like simple geometric forms, you know, like long lines and almost like crystal like shapes, where you don't, I mean, crystals themselves, I think I kind of gravitate towards like rock formations and crystals themselves as forms, because they can be so loose in their application. They don't necessarily, crystals already like reflect light in such a strange way that you can kind of have them exist anywhere, and it can kind of make sense to the eye, like visually, because it doesn't, they already are like it's already hard to like visually contemplate like what their presence is in like in a realistic way. Like if that makes sense, like they're not these simple shapes. You know, they're reflecting light in complex ways. So when you draw them, you don't necessarily have to include like values in the way that you would like a simple cube or something, where light is very clearly coming from one direction and stopping at the other direction. So if you create like these kind of weird fragments and like fractured crystal-like shapes, and especially with like, you know, black and white ink or whatever, or blue and white ink, like I'm using here, they can just kind of exist. They don't necessarily need to be they don't need to be like lit from the same direction as all these other shapes. I mean, that's how I've used them in my fine art too. They become like a graphic element and not, but still have some kind of depth. You can like, you can use line work to accentuate, you know, different parts of that, of those types of fractures and shapes, but they don't have to, resemble like a realistic of the world type of shape or geometrical shape anyway. That's why I love using them for that reason. I have been looking more at like architectural drawings and the way that kind of a space is defined by like these geometric shapes and parallel lines and a lot of like vertices that are really interesting, like the way that like shapes meet up together. So I'll probably be using those more in like my future work because I like to play around with that more and kind of figure out how to use it to my advantage. Right now I don't, like I said, like I'm kind of dabbling because whenever I do it, it kind of is distracting if I go a little too hard in that direction. Like it becomes like an automatic focal point because your brain's like putting it into reality when you shade one region and highlight another region, and it's supposed to be like this physical thing that's like reaching out towards the view or away from it or whatever. Like I said, when it's dealing with perspective, it kind of changes the world that you're depicting. Whereas again, this is, you know, these elements have shape and volume, but they don't necessarily exist in a world where you feel like you can like touch it. Like it feels like it is purely abstract for that reason. Mixing that with realism, that's another reason why I think again like that is such an interesting way to go, because you're dealing with something that does feel physical and something that feels completely like not physical. And I think I've done that on purpose over the years because, well, unintentionally, I suppose, but I think subconsciously on purpose, I would say, because that contrast between like pure abstraction and realism is super interesting. And you automatically can relate to the abstraction more because it's existing alongside something that is relatable, something that is physical, like a person, especially when the person's depicted in a realistic way. If you have something like some of my sketches and drawings, you know, the person, like those two elements like become combined almost, where there isn't like a distinguishing line between them. So that's again like it's like a different way of depicting a person or figure, because you're now in the area of like forming a person or realism in a way that it's not relatable, but it's the whole of all these lines and shapes is, you know, what they create, which is a face or something, is relatable. So it's almost, I think that's an interesting balance for sure. But what I was referring to earlier was like my paintings. So like the paintings that involve a figure or a portrait or something along those lines, like that mixed with abstraction next to it or around it, around the face or something like that. That is that's an interesting aspect to me for sure. So that is kind of like the power of like abstract line work and drawing and shapes and everything, is because it gives you like a dream world to like kind of depict, which is just, it's like I mean that's just I suppose it's just like a fancy way of describing doodling and you know, notebook sketching basically. But that taken to like a high degree is what I'm trying to achieve with my drawings and everything. And this is what I've been doing since I was young. And it's almost like a discovery process of like creating things based off of what we understand or know visually in our own world, like flowers or, you know, spheres, tree-like formations, you know, branches. I mean, rock formations, the way the way there is some kind of geometrical forms in nature, but not ever as perfect as we kind of like imagine to be. Perfect in like their own sense, but not, we see them as kind of like organized chaos or something. Like when you're in nature, see like rock formations, like it's always has the right balance of like variety. And I mean, the natural world it's a whole other subject. You could, talk about that for hours, like the beauty and how that exists in the natural world. But so when we're making these types of, when I'm kind of like studying how and what kind of shapes to use, like how to use the shapes that I have in my mind, like that's I'm almost like doing like physical practice to like figure out how to bring them into a world that is relatable in a sense, but never so much that it seems like you could exist there. So that's kind of yeah, that's interesting to me anyway. That was a call coming in, but and this, I move my drawings around a lot because I think I'm getting a lot of like kind of visual feedback from my subconscious randomly, like when I'm doing these types of drawings and these types of things. So I'm like throwing the paper back and forth around a lot. I'm kind of like switching back and forth a ton. I'm like twisting things in a different direction because I'm constantly seeing like gaps in the composition or like things that should be added or changed or whatever. So that's kind of why I turn things around a lot and kind of change things constantly. And this is, I think this has become, it's kind of taken on a different life than I definitely thought it would. This particular drawing is becoming a little bit all over the place, but I still kind of love it because it is so kind of random and everything. But it's been a great exercise in trying to use some new shapes and techniques that I wasn't sure about using. I really love this blue ink. I probably have to get more because I'm going to start running out sooner than later. But I'm starting to get a better handle on kind of like how to use this pen. It's definitely made me want to experiment a little more with some different types of pens and things, which I don't do naturally, but I've been tempted to kind of look outward a little bit because this one is it's a little rough. It's a very cheap kind of like pen, a deep, what am I trying to say? Like a dipping pen or whatever. It's just, this is like the most basic kind of cheapest one at the art store that I could see because I just wanted to experiment and like see how it felt and stuff. But now I'm definitely seeing like how great it would be to have one that is a nice, high quality, probably expensive dip ink pen because the control is probably incredible that you could, and the tip of the pen is obviously can become a problem when it's holding ink in a variety of ways while I'm drawing. So some of these lines just end up kind of rough for that reason. I'll blame it on the pen for sure. Even though I'm new to this kind of way of using ink and stuff, I'm so used to using like micron pens where it's just super controlled, and the output of medium is so controlled that there's nothing else you could do with it. But the using this kind of pen is kind of fun. It's a little more like unpredictable. So I've enjoyed that aspect. Trying to control it for that reason is fun. But it reminds me a little bit of like using a brush pen, which I used to use a lot when I was younger, because gaining control over a brush pen was definitely a learning curve for sure. And I ended up doing a lot of it when I was a kid, and utilizing a lot in my old sketchbooks because it was so different and so interesting to use. I have not used it in a while, but using this kind of reminded me of a little bit of that. Like I do have to kind of pay attention to the direction and like the flow of ink slightly because it's going to be heavy in a certain direction. It can be kind of light. Then you're also dealing with timing, like how much ink you have changes over the course of a number of strokes. That's been fascinating for sure. And then balancing all of that with like trying to work on different shapes and utilizing different shapes. I really like these weird orbs that I added in here. And then trying to bring in some of these kind of like shaded, I don't know what you'd call them, like these kind of, I like these kind of spike-like formations as well. I'm trying to remember where that idea came from. There's another illustrator that used it, but then it was also used in a couple of paintings I saw. I'll have to find some of those references and add them in the next video or something. But so I'm trying to, taking a little bit of everything. I do like these geometric forms and lines here. They're adding some contrast to these kind of larger orbs and areas. And I've already kind of laid out some other shapes here too, so I'm going to kind of go back and add more detail to those as well. And now I'm just kind of adding, darkening certain areas, kind of creating a little more contrast in certain spaces. And, the little details are fun. I was contemplating whether to just fill this entire sheet out, but I felt like it was, by the time I get to the end, I think I'm kind of happy with how it looks. I am, I'm tempted to just complete the whole thing, but then you kind of lose this sense of, the sense of heavy composition in the center that branches out. And it would have taken, I'd probably be drawing for another couple hours or something, or at least another hour or something like that. But yeah, that's mostly what I've been thinking about lately, and especially with, I guess my place as an artist, as a creative person in society, kind of what other people are dealing with too. I see a lot of that kind of thing online, especially. I follow a ton of artists, so you kind of see them talk about that, and when there is like this kind of zeitgeist that you can't ignore really in the creative world, like usually when a number of people are going through something, it means a lot of people are going through something. So when you hear and see a number of artists, especially I know personally, that are experiencing certain things as creatives, then you kind of, it's hard not to just think like, oh, I bet a lot of people are kind of going through this same type of thing. But the ones that I think are able to deal with those things in the most healthy way are usually ones that just kind of disregard everything else that's happening. Even no matter how good or how bad things are around them or in the world, like they still kind of recognize their place as artists and what the purpose of that is. And that seems to be a pretty powerful way to deal with kind of everything that takes place, like in your own life as an artist, for sure. And whenever I can kind of get to that area mentally, I definitely feel the best, because it is when this is what you do. When you create, when you make things, like that is kind of just your number one job in a sense. Everything else feels like extra. When we're talking about, physical, we're talking about things that you're like, output, creative output and stuff. Obviously, there's things that are more important than making art. But when it comes to like your output as a person, your own personal work, your own vision, or, one of the main reasons that you're here or whatever, like that's like creating the work and kind of putting your thoughts about everything else to the side. I hope that makes sense. Like that's, if I can get there, then usually I do feel better about my place and like the way things are going. Because I feel like everything goes through cycles, the world can change, but as long as you're creating your work and working on like your own vision and trying to bring that into the world in the best way you can, that's a huge part for sure. But thanks so much for listening. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, and leave them in the comments, and I appreciate all of you. So thank you so much, and have a good week.